a few minutes after 10, and we have, close to everyone who had registered. So, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Mary Atkins, and I'm a Senior Project Manager and the Environmental Services Group Head here at Wessler Engineering. I wanted to make sure that we're able to communicate and to make sure everyone's familiar with the GoToWebinar panel. So I have a question that I'd like you to answer. There should be a question box in your panel, in the GoToWebinar panel. If you can tell me how many people are watching the webinar with you. If you're watching it by yourself, then just type in 1. If there's a group of you, you might type in an estimated number of people that are watching with you. So I'll give you a few minutes to answer the question. Good. I'm seeing a lot of those responses. That's great. Good. It sounds like everyone can hear us. So if you want to just continue typing in those, I'll get those as we move along. So let's see. So thank you for those responses, and I'm glad that everyone could join us. We have a great presentation today on pollution prevention and good housekeeping do's and don'ts. The presenter is Jake Barker. Jake's an environmental scientist in our environmental services group. He's been with Wessler since 2011 and has worked closely with a variety of MS4s on stormwater quality management planning. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to ask questions. So please use the question box that you just answered a question in that GoToWebinar panel. And feel free to submit those questions as they come up, and we will address them during a question-answer session at the end. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Jake for the training presentation.
Thanks, Mary, and good morning, everyone. Today we are going to discuss pollution prevention and good housekeeping. This presentation has been prepared to serve as municipal employee training for all MS4 communities. It's important to note that all MS4 communities are required to complete municipal training on an annual basis. Please be sure to download the training agenda and sign-in sheet that should have been sent to your email for download. Please have everyone sign in and be sure to save a copy for your records. So today we are going to briefly discuss each of the following topics. We'll take a look at these items shortly, but first let's discuss why this training is important. One reason is that municipalities conduct activities each day that pose a threat to water quality. These activities include automobile and equipment fueling, material storage practices, chemical handling, and other general practices. Another reason is that municipally owned facilities are required by the MS4 program to maintain pollution prevention measures and practices. And lastly, as we've already mentioned, MS4s are required to train municipal employees on an annual basis to minimize adverse impacts to stormwater quality. So our first item here is salt storage and application. And we have two examples from two different MS4 communities. The first here, we can see that the salt de-icing stockpile is located in a covered structure, and that the salt is pushed back away from any openings. In the other photo, we can see that the structure is not really sufficiently covered. There's this opening in the back here that you can see that allows this stockpile to be exposed to stormwater. So this is not really a sufficient example of salt storage. Some proper management strategies for salt storage and application. Do store de-icing salt stockpiles in a covered structure. Push de-icing salt back into designated areas, as this prevents exposure to stormwater. And remember that salt should only be applied as needed to achieve the desired de-icing effect. So if we take a look at this example here, we can see that the salt is located in a covered structure, that the salt is pushed back away from any openings, and that the salt is not exposed to stormwater. So this is a really good example of salt storage and application. Some things to avoid when managing de-icing salt stockpiles. Do not expose de-icing salts to stormwater. Examples of this could include uncovered storage areas and storing excess amounts of de-icing salts. Do not use water To clean up spilled de-icing salt, utilize dry methods only, as this prevents discharges to the stormwater conveyances. And lastly, do not over-apply de-icing salts. This reduces the potential for pollution in stormwater runoff. If we take a look at the example provided here, we can see that although the stockpile is covered, it does not appear to be adequately sized to contain the amount of de-icing salt currently being stored here. We can actually see that the stockpile is overflowing the containment area and is being exposed to stormwater here and also over here. So this would not really be an ideal salt storage management practice. The next item is material stockpile practices. And again, we have two examples. In the first photo, we can see here that materials are separated in designated areas and that stockpiles are swept up and pushed back. In the other photo here, there is no real designated area for the materials. They're not swept up, and you can even see along here in this photo that the material has migrated to this pavement surface and is also being eroded here on the back side. So this is not an ideal material stockpile management practice. But let's take a closer look at some of the management strategies for material stockpiling. Do stockpile materials within designated areas. Sweep up or push back stockpiled materials into designated areas to prevent exposure to stormwater. If applicable, use a vegetative buffer to prevent exposure to stormwater. And lastly, municipal wastes, such as street sweeping debris, should be stored under a covered structure and on a solid and sealed surface like concrete to prevent potential erosion and infiltration into the ground. So if we take a look at the example provided here, we can see that the materials are separated into designated areas, that the materials are swept up and pushed back into the containment area, and then this community has actually taken the precaution of putting up safety bollards to prevent any damage to the containment area. Some items to avoid when managing material stockpiles. Do not store stockpiled materials adjacent to open storm sewer inlets or near water courses, flood zones, or other areas that may potentially damage water quality. Do not overstock stockpile areas. You want to properly size the stockpile containment areas. Excess materials may breach the containment structure, exposing those materials to erosion. And lastly, do not assume that the stockpiled materials will maintain themselves. Frequent inspections and maintenance of stockpiles are necessary. So if we take a look at the example here, we can see that the designated areas are in need of maintenance. You can see that the materials are breaching the containment area here. Stockpiles appear to be overstocked. The designated areas are not really properly sized for the material. And you can't see it very well, but located behind this containment area is a water course. And this exposed material that's breaching the containment area is really, there's a high potential that it could reach the waterway. So this is not really an ideal management practice. The next item is chemical handling practices. And again, here are two examples from two separate MS4 communities. And in the first photo, we can see that containers are stored on secondary containment units, that containers are sealed, that the containers are labeled according to their contents. In the other photo, however, the containers are not stored under cover. They're actually stored outside where they are exposed to the elements. There's no secondary containment for these containers. The drums appear to be deteriorating. You can see the rust here. And they're not labeled, so we don't know what is in these containers. Let's take a closer look at some of the proper management strategies for chemical handling. Do utilize and store chemicals indoors where appropriate. Exposure to inclement weather may deteriorate containers, especially if they're metal. Keep chemical containers closed or sealed at all times unless in use. Place containers of in-use liquid chemicals on a spill pallet or provide other adequate secondary containment. Label all drums and containers according to the contents being stored. especially if they're used oils. Used oil containers must be clearly marked as used oils, and the amount of used oil recycled should be recorded for your annual reporting. Lastly, routinely inspect chemical containers, especially those that are 55 gallons or larger, on a regular basis for leaks, spills, and other signs of deterioration. So if we take a look at the example here, we can see that the containers are stored indoors, that the drums are sealed, and they actually have this absorbent mat on top here. The drums are labeled according to their contents, used oil, and secondary containment is provided. So this is a really good management practice here. Some items to avoid. Do not store chemical containers near stormwater inlets or conveyances. Do not store chemical containers near building entrances. Spilled materials may escape the containment area and migrate to outdoor stormwater conveyances. And lastly, do not store containers directly on the ground. You want to elevate those containers to prevent any deterioration and corrosion, especially, again, if they're metal containers. So if we take a look at the example here, we can see that the storage container is actually stored next to a trench drain down here, and then it's also stored next to these exterior garage doors. So as we mentioned, there is the potential that a spill could migrate outdoors to a stormwater conveyance, or if this trench were a storm drain, it would migrate to a stormwater conveyance as well. Also, the container is not properly labeled. We don't know what's in this container, so this would not be an ideal chemical handling practice. Some additional proper management strategies for chemical handling. Recycle empty drums for reuse. Many of our MS4 communities reuse empty drums at parks and other recreational areas for trash containers. So if you do this, be sure to remove all labels and mark the drums as empty or trash. If you're storing drums outside, be sure to store them on their sides. This will allow precipitation to roll off the drums and not accumulate on the tops of lids or inside the drums. And be sure to stabilize those drums to prevent them from rolling. Lastly, if in-use chemical storage containers must be stored outdoors, then the container should be provided with cover and secondary containment, as this prevents corrosion due to inclement weather. So if we take a look at the example here, we can see that the drums are empty, that they're stored on their sides, that the drums are secured to prevent rolling. You can see that here. And that the drums are labeled. It's a little bit harder to see, but they are labeled here. So this is a really good example of chemical handling practices. Some additional items to avoid here. Do not store empty containers that are no longer in use. Any empty drums or containers that are no longer being used should be recycled or properly disposed of. If empty chemical storage containers are stored outdoors, do not store them in the upright position, as this allows for precipitation to accumulate on the tops of the lids and inside the drums. And lastly, do not allow drums to deteriorate. So again, if we take a look at the example, we can see here that the drum is obviously not in use. There's no plan to reuse the drum, and it's obvious that the drum is deteriorating. So this drum should really be properly disposed of, and it goes without saying that this would not be an ideal chemical handling practice. The next item is general chemical management, and again, we have two examples here from two different MS4 communities. In the first photo, we can see that chemicals are organized by type and use, and that the storage has secondary containment in the form of a drip pan right down here. In the other photo, we can see there's really no rhyme or reason to the storage, and there's no consistent protection from drips or spills. There appears to be maybe a spill pan here, but otherwise there's not much to speak of. Some proper management strategies for general chemical management. Do organize small quantity chemicals, those would be your aerosols, paints, and oils, by type and use. Provide chemical storage areas with drip trays and absorbent mats to prevent drips and spills. Remove or recycle small quantity containers that are no longer in use. If aerosol containers get clogged or damaged, just collect them in a container for later disposal or recycling. And lastly, check with your local solid waste management district in regards to other recycling opportunities. So if we take a look at the example here, we can see that the chemicals are organized by type and use. And it's hard to see, but there is some drip pans provided here on each shelf, and that the storage lockers are labeled. So here this is labeled as flammable. So this is a good example of general chemical management. Some items to avoid when managing general chemical storage. Do not continue to store chemicals that are no longer in use. You want to utilize good housekeeping techniques at your storage areas. Do not dispose of unused small quantity containers, those are aerosols, paints, and oils, in ways that may be harmful to public health or the environment. Again, just consult with your local solid waste management district or waste removal contractor for proper disposal techniques. And lastly, do not accumulate large amounts of small quantity used oil containers. All oils generated from maintenance operations should be placed in a used oil container for recycling. So in our example here, we can see that the chemicals are not really organized by type or use. This facility is still storing chemical containers that are no longer being used and appear to be empty back here. And these drums are not labeled. And also there's no secondary containment. So this is not really an ideal general chemical management practice. The next item here is general waste management. And again, we have two examples. In the first, you can see that the dumpster is closed. There are no signs of leaks or deterioration, and there's no trash or other debris in the area. On the other hand, in the other photo, we can see that the dumpster is overfull, that the dumpster is open, and that there is trash and debris in the adjacent areas. Some proper management strategies. Keep trash dumpsters closed at all times, especially when not in use, as this prevents contact with stormwater. Conduct regular inspections of dumpsters. Check for signs of deterioration and leaks. And then replace any leaking or deteriorated dumpsters. Lastly, regularly empty trash dumpsters to prevent overfilling. And if we take a look at the example provided here, we can see that the dumpster, again, is closed, that there are no signs of leaks or deterioration, and it's not overfilled, and there's no signs of trash or other debris in the area. So this is a really good example of general waste management. Some items to avoid. Do not store uncovered trash dumpsters outdoors. Trash containers stored outdoors should be kept in a covered container or dumpster. Do not overfill dumpsters. Wind and other adverse weather conditions may carry trash or other debris to stormwater conveyances. Do not place uncovered dumpsters near storm drains. Contaminants may leak from dumpsters and migrate to stormwater conveyances. So let's take a look at the example here. We can see that this roll-off dumpster is not covered. It's beginning to show signs of deterioration. You can see that here with all this rust. And there is some trash and debris in the area. So this is not an ideal general waste management practice. The next item is fueling operations, and here we have two examples from two different MS4 communities. In the first photo, we can see that the fueling area is located on a concrete surface, that there are safety bollards have been constructed here to prevent any damage from equipment or other vehicles. And then there's a spill kit located conveniently in the area should there be any spills or leaks. In the other photo, we see that the fueling area is sort of half gravel, half concrete. The tanks appear to be deteriorating. You can see the rust here. There is no spill kit in the area. It's important to note that these tanks, they are double-walled, but if they were not, there would need to be some other form of secondary containment in this area. Well, let's take a closer look at some of the proper management strategies for fueling operations. So do provide secondary containment for all bulk fuel containers, those that are 55 gallons or larger. Acceptable secondary containment consists of a containment structure capable of capturing a spill of the largest container within that containment unit. Label tanks according to their contents. Inspect accumulated rainwater in secondary containment units. If there are signs of contamination, the water must be pumped out and disposed of properly. Ensure spill kits are located in an easily accessible location near the fueling area and chemical handling areas. And lastly, when possible, consider covering containment areas and fuel transfer areas, as this prevents contact with stormwater. So if we take a look at our example here, we can see that there is adequate secondary containment. There's a spill kit located in the fueling area, and the secondary containment unit is covered. So this is a really good example of fueling operations. Some items to avoid: do not store bulk fuel tanks in direct contact with the ground. Tanks should be elevated to prevent exposure to moisture, which may cause corrosion, especially in metal tanks. Do not store bulk fuel containers on crushed stone or grass. Containers should be stored on a concrete pad to prevent spills and drips from infiltrating into the ground and contaminating soil and the groundwater. And lastly, do not neglect outdoor containers. Ensure that tanks are not accumulating rust, that correct labels are in place, and that equipment is functioning properly. So if we take a look at the example here, we can see that the tank is stored on crushed stone. Again, it could infiltrate into the ground, which we don't want. There is no spill kit in the area, and the tank is not labeled. So this is not an ideal fueling operation management practice. Some additional management strategies for fueling operations: do provide fueling tanks with some form of protective structure, barrier, or curbing to prevent damage to the tanks. These can be in the form of safety bollards or other protective structures. Turn off your vehicle during fueling operations. Apply absorbent materials to fuel spills immediately using the nearby materials from the spill kit. And during bulk fuel transfers, department personnel should ensure that the driver is present throughout the entire unloading procedure to monitor fuel transfers and detect potential leaks and spills. So if we take a look at this example of a fueling area, we see a few things. The fuel transfer area is covered, that there are safety bollards in place, and it's hard to see, but there is a spill kit right here. So this is a good example, again, of a fueling operation. Some items to avoid: do not fill a fuel can that is located inside a vehicle or in the bed of a truck. Place the fuel can or equipment on the ground before filling. Remember, the can is not grounded from electrical charge if it's still inside the vehicle. Do not smoke or re-enter your vehicle during fueling. Static electricity can build and cause a fire. Do not leave the vehicle during fueling. Do not attempt to top off the tank, as overfilling can cause spills. And lastly, do not rinse spilled fluids to nearby inlets or stormwater conveyances. Be sure to use that absorbent materials to collect the spilled fluids. So I included this example here because the fueling area is equipped with a stormwater inlet. The tank is double-walled here, but any leaks or drips or spills that may occur during the actual fueling transfer have the potential to flow to this inlet. Also, having a drain right next to the fueling area may make it a bit more tempting to rinse spilled fluids into that drain. So while this is nice concrete pad, secondary containment, this is not an ideal fueling operation. So the next item is spill prevention and cleanup. And again, here are two examples from two different MS4 communities. And in the first photo, we can see that the floor is clean and free of drips, spills, and other debris. However, in the other photo, there's an obvious oil spill. There are no absorbent materials applied to this, and the spilled material really should be cleaned up and the contaminated soil removed. Let's take a look at some proper management strategies for spill prevention and cleanup. Do clean up spill fluids immediately using oil dry or other absorbent materials. Remove yourself from harm and contact your department supervisor in the event of a significant leak or spill. Refer to safety data sheets for chemical properties and handling information. Place absorbent materials or a spill barrier around spilled material to prevent the flow of materials to a floor drain and to absorb the chemical. And lastly, cease cleanup operations and contact outside assistance if the spill becomes hazardous to employees. So if we take a look at the example provided here, we can see that absorbent material has been applied to a spilled chemical. The absorbent material should be swept up properly. Do not allow the absorbent material to set for an extended period of time. Some items to avoid: do not allow spills to flow off-site. Spilled chemicals must not be allowed to infiltrate into the ground or enter a storm drain, swale, or other waterway. Do not hose spilled materials down with water. If water is used to clean up a spill, it must be collected and disposed of properly. Granular absorbent should not be routinely spread on the ground or in secondary containment units. Absorbent material that is allowed to remain on the floor can be scattered and carried outside on vehicle and equipment tires or on the bottoms of shoes. The materials should really be swept up as soon as possible. So if we take a look at our photo here, it's a little bit hard to see, but absorbent material has been applied to a oil spill here, but it's just been left. The absorbent material is obviously saturated, and it should be removed immediately. Absorbent material should be swept up promptly and not allowed to sit for an extended period of time. Anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes after the application, and certainly under an hour. Some additional spill prevention and cleanup management practices. Do position spill kits and spill absorbent materials in close proximity to fueling areas and chemical storage areas. Clearly label all spill kit containers and materials, and train all employees on how to properly use materials in the spill kits. So here in the example provided, we can see that the spill kit is properly stocked, and it is located next to a chemical storage area. Some items to avoid here: do not neglect spill kits. Restock the spill kit with absorbent materials after use. Do not place used materials back into the spill kit, and used spill absorbent materials should be properly disposed of. And lastly, do not expose the spill absorbent materials to inclement weather. The spill kits should be sealed in a waterproof container. So here in the example provided, we can see that the spill kit is empty, and it's actually being used to collect trash at this point. This spill kit is going to be of very little use in the instance of a chemical spill. Spill kits really need to be adequately stocked. So this is obviously not an ideal spill prevention and cleanup practice. The next item here is vehicle maintenance, and again, we've got two examples from two different MS4 communities. In the first photo, we see that drip pans with spill absorbent mats have been placed underneath this leaking piece of equipment. There's one here and one here. In the other photo, we can see that there's a leaking piece of equipment, and it's just been allowed to drip onto the concrete surface here. Really, absorbent materials should be applied to that spill and swept up immediately, and then maintenance performed on both pieces of equipment. But let's take a look at some proper management strategies. Do conduct vehicle maintenance indoors where floor drains are not connected to the stormwater system. Check vehicles and equipment routinely for leaks and spills, and repair is required. Drip pans and absorbent spill mats should be temporarily placed under vehicles and equipment until those repairs can be completed. Transfer accumulated materials in the drip pans to a designated used oil container as soon as possible. And store used oil filters, batteries, antifreeze, and the like in separate designated areas until properly disposed of or recycled. So here we can see in the example provided that we've got a leaking piece of equipment, and the equipment is provided with a drip pan and absorbent mat. So this is a good management practice here. Some items to avoid: do not store leaky equipment and vehicles over interior floor drains. Spilled oils and other harmful chemicals may flow to the storm, sanitary, or combined sewer systems. Do not store leaky equipment or vehicles outdoors. Spilled oils and other harmful chemicals should not be allowed to infiltrate into the ground. And lastly, do not allow spill absorbent materials to remain on the floor for an extended period of time. The remaining absorbent material can be scattered and carried outside to stormwater conveyances, or it may even become a slip hazard. So if we take a look at the example provided here, we can see that we have a spilled chemical that has not been addressed. Really, absorbent materials should be applied to the spill and swept up promptly. So this is obviously not an ideal management practice. Some additional proper management strategies for vehicle maintenance. Do conduct vehicle and equipment washing indoors where interior floor drains do not flow to the stormwater system. If washing activities cannot be conducted indoors, select a well-vegetated, flat location away from any stormwater conveyances to conduct washing activities. Use a trigger hose or bucket to conserve water. Use detergents and soaps sparingly. If possible, only use plain water and a coarse sponge. And lastly, consider conducting washing operations at a commercial vehicle washing facility. If we take a closer look at the example here, we can see that all vehicle maintenance and washing is being conducted indoors and that the drains are connected to the sanitary sewer for treatment. So this is a good example of vehicle maintenance management strategies. Again, some items to avoid when managing vehicle maintenance areas. Do not allow vehicle and equipment wash waters to drain to stormwater inlets and other stormwater conveyances, swale streams, ditches, and the like. Do not store excessively dirty vehicles or open box bed equipment. By that I mean dump trucks, de-icing salt spreaders, and the like, outdoors without cover. Do not habitually wash vehicles and equipment. Only wash vehicles and equipment when it's really necessary. And lastly, do not over-apply detergents and soaps. You want to practice conservation. So if we take a look at our example here, we can see wash water. It's a mixture of soap, water, sediments, and some other debris, and it's flowing off-site, potentially to a storm drain or other stormwater conveyance. So this is not an ideal management practice. Our last item here is just some general management practices, and we'll just run through them really quick. Do pick up and properly dispose of litter prior to mowing activities of municipal properties. Floor drains should be kept clean and free of vehicle and equipment leaks and spills. Routinely inspect and clean interior floor drains. When applying pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, always follow the directions on the label and only apply the amount needed. Record, remedy, and document illegal dumping and illicit discharges. Do not allow litter and debris to be carried off to storm sewers and local waterways. Do not dispose of floor cleaning wash water to the storm drain system. Do not allow debris and spilt oils to enter storm drain system. And lastly, do not continue to store unused or expired chemicals at your facility. Just properly dispose of those unused chemicals. So in conclusion, it's important to remember that MS4 communities are required to document municipal employee training on an annual basis. This webinar will be available on our website for future municipal employee training needs. So don't forget to download the training sign-in sheet and agenda, and be sure to save a copy for your records. I think we are ready to take questions now, and I'll invite Mary Atkins back on.
All right. Well, thanks so much for that great presentation, Jake. And we do actually have some questions that are coming in. And the first one, the first one was asking about whether the webinar is going to be archived. Jason was asking that question, and if it would be available for viewing later. And yes, as Jake just mentioned, we are going to have this available on our website for future viewing. And then there was an attendance sheet and an agenda that was sent out to the attendees who signed up prior to yesterday that can be used for that record-keeping purposes. The next question, let's see here, is from Leslie, and this came in when you were talking about some of the stockpiling, and she asked, what is the definition of material? Is it any non-soil? So, Jake, did you want to try to answer that? I think maybe trying to talk about, what types of materials might be stockpiled.
Sure. You know, I think we typically see, and when we think of material stockpiles, we think of recycled metals, soils, topsoils, sands, gravel, crushed stone. I think that's sort of what we're trying to capture here. But specifically those finer materials, your sands and soils that are more at risk of erosion.
Yeah, good. Okay, we have another question from Gary. How do you suggest that a municipality handles the material picked up from street sweepers? Do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
Well, I'll let you add to what I briefly want to talk about. What we mentioned in the presentation was specifically street sweeping debris. So if a municipality is collecting street sweeping debris, we talk about making sure that it's on a solid surface, so a concrete pad or maybe even a metal dumpster, something where it's not going to infiltrate into the ground and contaminate the soil and groundwater. So if you are collecting street sweeping debris, just be sure that there is no risk of infiltration or even erosion and potential contamination of the local stormwater conveyance.
Yeah, good. And I was just going to add that if your street sweeping requires dewatering, that dewatering water really needs to be handled as wastewater. Probably the best way is to discharge it to a sanitary sewer if the wastewater treatment plant can handle or gives permission to make such a discharge. We do have another question here from, hold on a second, from Jason. Would it be a problem to store chemical containers near a trench drain that first goes to an oil water separator and then to sanitary sewer?
I believe as long as they're being treated, as long as the trench drain does not go directly to a stormwater conveyance or directly to the sanitary sewer, I would venture to say that would be acceptable. Do you agree?
Sure. Well, and the oil water separator, keep in mind, is just going to take out fuels or oils. There might be other substances that might pass through an oil water separator. So just do an evaluation of what chemicals are being stored and have a discussion with your sanitary department or your wastewater treatment operator to see if there's going to be an issue with, if there was a spill of whatever that was, is it going to be captured in the oil water separator, and is it going to be an issue if it hits their wastewater treatment plant? Good. We have another one from Christy. Where do you place the used spill kit material? That's a good question.
Yeah, and we've sort of had this question come up with some of the communities that we work with. I mentioned that your best allies here are to contact your contracted waste remover or your local solid waste management district. The used oil material, it does have to be properly disposed of. So I would recommend contacting one of those two entities. Yeah,
and I was just going to mention too that if your spill has been completely absorbed into a pad or into the granular material and it's not dripping, that we've contacted some local trash haulers, and they say that that's fine to put into the regular trash as long as it's not dripping. But sometimes if it's a used oil spill, maybe it can be collected and still recycled as used oil. Kind of just depends on what's being collected. Okay, so there's another question about where is the training sign-in sheet and agenda to download. There was an email that was sent out to all the attendees. It went out yesterday around 4 o'clock, and it should have had a link to a sign-in sheet and agenda that could be downloaded. We will, after we have this available online to view, the sign-in sheet will also be on, I think it's going to be a blog posting, so it can be downloaded from that as well. Let's see. Here's another question from Jan. how do you handle parking lots where vehicles have dripped small amounts of oil that has dried up but becomes evident when it rains? Oh, Jake, are you there?
Yeah, sorry. I'm trying to think. Do you want to take that one, Mary?
Oh, sure, of course, yeah. I would just say that if there's evidence of spills that have dried, to try to scrub the surface to get it cleaned so that it doesn't look like a fresh spill. I know sometimes that can be challenging to get rid of an old stain, or even if the surface can be cleaned and then coated or painted, just so that you have a fresh surface and then continue to clean up afterwards. I know that can be a big challenge trying to get those stains cleaned. Let's see, the next one. Oh, right. Lisa is asking for used oil versus waste oil definitions. I can go ahead and address that, anything that can be recycled is used oil. And then those things that have to be disposed of and can't be recycled would be a waste oil. So when you're doing labeling on your used oil containers, you want to make sure and label it as used oil if it's something that's going to be recycled or reused. And then the waste, if you have waste oil labeling, that would then be handled as a waste, as like a hazardous waste. Another question, this is from Shannon, does having a BMP on site make outside storage acceptable?
I would say yes, as long as it's adequate. We talked a little bit about outside storage in drums, if that's maybe what you're talking about. As long as there is some form of secondary containment to contain leaks, spills, and then it's also being stored on a solid sealed surface. As long as there's no risk for infiltration into the ground, to contaminate groundwater, or to reach a stormwater conveyance, I would say yes, outdoor storage is with the appropriate BMPs is acceptable. Also, depending on the situation, you should have that storage area covered, again, to prevent any deterioration or corrosion due to the weather.
Good. Another question from Mike. During BMP inspections, not municipal, but specifically around commercial sites and restaurants, what is the proper method to store the excess grease from the fryers? I'm not sure about that. I've seen like grease dumpsters. I think that maybe grease haulers provide possibly. I would say grease needs to be covered. It needs to be in some sort of a sealed container that's not leaking. Anything that's going to prevent exposure to stormwater and any leaks or spills is going to be a good practice. Obviously, those are all kind of dependent on the site and where the drainage is, where they're storing those grease containers. Let's see. There's another question from Rick. Do chemical handling require certification to do this, or is it under the hold on a second. Is there a certification for chemical handling? And I'm not aware of that. I think that when it comes to pesticides that are being applied, obviously there's some certifications. If you want to, if I'm not answering that properly, if you could maybe rephrase that question, Rick. Certification. I'm not aware of any certification. Now, if it's leaving as a waste, like a hazardous waste, there's hazardous waste rules about how those have to be handled. I'm not sure if I'm answering that question properly. There's another question here from Michael. What types of materials need to be stored in yellow cabinets, like the flame cabinets?
Oh, the flame cabinets, sure. The flammable chemicals, we see a lot of equipment, fuels, mixtures. That's typically what we see in the flame cabinets. Not necessarily the small quantity containers that may be flammable.
Yeah, sometimes paints are stored in those. I'm not an expert on flame cabinets, but I would say, anything that is flammable, those cabinets are intended for storage of those types of materials. Got another question here. Oh, Rick, just saying with the fertilizers or the weed killers. Yes, so he was asking about pesticide certification. Whenever you can purchase something just over the counter, it does not require certification. There are, fertilizers and weed killers, pesticides mostly, I think, not necessarily the fertilizers, that would require certification for the application of certain regulated chemicals. But, anything that you buy at like the Home Depot or just over the counter would not require certification. Here's a question or kind of a comment from Mike. Oh, wouldn't the grease containers be considered as hazardous waste and require a secondary containment? I'm not exactly sure about that. The restaurant grease, that's something that you could probably look into a little bit more. I'm not sure that I can answer that question, but I think secondary containment obviously is a good practice. So yes, I think that was a good comment. Let's see. Oh, we got a comment here from Reggie. If you want to use the material from sweepers, you need to get the okay from the Office of Land Quality. So, yeah, so obviously coordination with the Office of Land Quality at IDEM is good for their questions regarding the street sweeper reuse. Oh, and she also mentioned that street sweeping material is considered a solid waste. That came from Reggie as well. Another question or comment from Tony. An empty barrel marked used spill material. Oh, right. So maybe suggesting that you use a, label your container as used spill material. Maybe a comment there. Okay, so Candy is asking, what exactly is properly disposed of? I think maybe related to maybe the spill material. Jake, do you want to go with that one?
Sure, and we kind of, I use that term loosely, but properly disposed of, whether it be, if it's a spilled material, and it, like Mary mentioned earlier, if it's, leaking or saturated, properly disposed of would be to contact a waste hauler to remove it. Something you can't put into general trash or can't be taken away by a waste contractor. So properly disposed of might be contracting a specific waste hauler or even recycling, something of that nature.
Yep, good. Reggie made another comment that says, these are good questions. IDEM will have additional information on these questions at LTAP and the annual MS4 meeting. Okay, good. Have another comment here from Shannon. We have secondary containment and an oil water separator. Okay, I think maybe just a follow-up from one of the questions before. Reggie has a question. What BMPs would justify no secondary containment for outdoor storage?
Oh, yeah, I kind of mentioned that. I think I briefly touched on that, or maybe I referenced that. So no BMPs for outdoor storage. I'm thinking maybe she's referring to like a double-walled fueling tank. If your fuel tanks are double-walled, that would already be your secondary containment. Is that how you understand that question?
Yeah, possibly. No secondary containment for outdoor storage. Yeah, I would say whenever there's a liquid in an outdoor storage area, you need some sort of a BMP. You're managing it somehow with some sort of secondary containment. So just to make that clear that you wouldn't be storing any kind of a chemical outside without some form of secondary containment. Good. Candy was rephrasing. Maybe I should rephrase my question. Could you define properly disposal? Yeah, I don't know. Candy, maybe we can talk about that on the side if you want to give me a call and we can help answer that question specifically. If you're looking for a place to properly dispose of, we can address that separately. A comment that the State Chemist Office regulates pesticide application. Yes, that's a good point. That was from Stephen. see. Oh, another comment from Leslie. Secondary containment could be required if an SPCC plan was required, if there's over 1,320 gallons of above-ground fuel storage. Yes, that's a very good comment. SPCC regulations could definitely apply in the instance of fuel or oil. Let's see. Another comment or question from Shannon. We put our street sweepings into a dumpster and have it hauled to the clean landfill at Ray's. It's picked up weekly. Is storing it in the dumpster until it's picked up acceptable? I'm not sure that we can answer that question from a regulatory standpoint. Contacting the Office of Land Quality is a good avenue for answering some of those questions. However, just to talk about it in general, I think as long as your dumpster is not leaking, if it's covered, you're preventing exposure to stormwater while it's being stored until it's being picked up, is going to be a good practice. Oh, here's another comment from Matt. Make sure the secondary containment gauge is working on double-walled tanks. Yes, that's a very good comment, a good practice. Let's see. Okay, let's see. One other comment here from Reggie, as long as the dumpster is empty within 60 days. Okay, so I think maybe related to the street sweeping material that you're storing it, as long as it's less than 60 days. So that was a comment from Reggie at IDEM. I think that that's the last of the questions. Those were all some very good questions. Wanted to go ahead and get this wrapped up so that everyone can get on their way. I'd like to mention again that we will be posting the video on our website probably within the next couple days. And be sure to subscribe to our blog at westlerengineering.com to get notifications of blog postings and future training opportunities. So as we do webinars, we advertise those through our blog. We also post information on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So if you want to get information through some of those social media outlets, by following us, you can get some information there as well. Well, thanks again for joining us today.